Welcome back. We've been talking today about the fallout from the federal budget unveiled a few days ago. It's dominated debate really on Parliament Hill ever since, but another political story is also creating some waves. Longtime Cabinet Minister Dominic Leblanc is fielding questions about whether he plans to replace Prime Minister Justin Trudeau as Liberal Party leader after a Globe and Mail column published this week detailed Leblanc's aspirations for the country's top job should Trudeau resign. The next day, Leblanc responded to the story, saying he plans to run in the next election as a candidate under Trudeau as Prime Minister. Have a listen.
Mr. Leblanc, do you plan to run for Liberal leader?
I'm sorry?
Do you plan to run for Liberal leader?
No, I plan to be a candidate in the next election under Prime Minister Trudeau's leadership. I'm very happy. I'm excited about that. I'm focused on the responsibilities he gave me. It's a big job. I'm enjoying it, and I'm optimistic that our team and the Prime Minister will make the case to Canadians as to why we should be re-elected.
So what does this latest Liberal leadership story tell us about the Prime Minister's future, and how is the federal budget playing out so far? A Sunday strategy session is here to talk about that. Kathleen Monk is a former NDP strategist and Director of Communications to the late Jack Layton. Kory Teneycke was Ontario Premier Doug Ford's campaign manager and former Director of Communications for Prime Minister Stephen Harper. And Scott Reid is a CTV political analyst and former Communications Director to Prime Minister Paul Martin. Hi, everybody. Let's start on the budget. We spoke about it for weeks and the strategy, Kathleen, that the government was employing. Did it land in the way they had hoped it would politically, do you think?
Well, I think after 3 weeks of a really good run of dropping out news nuggets every day and getting all that earned media, it did fall a little bit flat on budget day. And they are trying to get a fight on the capital gains tax, and they're trying to get the Conservatives to engage. But what we saw is the Conservatives, at least in the House, refused to acknowledge this fight whatsoever. In fact, actually, as of Thursday, just 2 days after the budget, they moved on to crime and carbon tax again. But the Conservative communication infrastructure around the country is mobilizing. And we're seeing a lot of, open letters that are being written, pushing back against the capital gains tax. And I actually think that in the long run, maybe the Liberals really want this fight, because there aren't a lot of millennials or Gen Z voters, frankly, who are struggling to pay rent that actually are going to be affected by the capital gains tax. In fact, the budget said it will only affect 40,000 people. And I think ultimately it's an unfair part of the tax code. So I think asking those in the long run to pay a little bit more, those who are rich who can afford it, those who are making, on sales, more than $250,000 additional, I think may actually play with the electorate, and they may win in the long game, but in the short run, it's been hard.
Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit, Scott. And earlier in the show, we debated the merits, of what Kathleen is saying on the policy itself, but as a political wedge, do you ultimately think if the Conservatives politically don't engage with it or don't take the bait, it will be successful for the Liberals? Is there a way to work around that?
Hard to see it as a big success because, I hear what Kathleen is saying, but from my perspective, you get all the grief. You get a financial fight. Fundamentally, you get a financial fight with doctors and professionals and entrepreneurs and business people and economists saying this is a terrible thing. So there's kind of that low, dull echo of that. But you don't get the political fight that you wanted, where you lure Poilievre out into Main Street and put him in the position of arguing, to cut the taxes of the Galen Westons. That's what they want. And they're very, very shrewdly just refusing to engage. And, I saw, Doug Ford at a microphone on Thursday, asked about it. He waded right into the battle. He took the cheese that they want Poilievre to take. But so far, they can't get Poilievre to put on the boxing gloves, to engage them in this fight. And I think that is a challenge for them. They need to transform this financial fight into a political fight. And until they get there, they're not going to get mileage out of it. The
closest kind of thing that happened to that this week was when Poilievre did an interview with Radio-Canada, Kory, in which he was asked very specifically for one of the first times with follow-ups, kind of like, what wouldn't you do based on the desire that you've stated to be more fiscally responsible and to essentially balance the budget? He didn't give very clear answers, but to Scott and Kathleen's point on the wedge that the Liberals are trying to create about, like, we're going to go after the wealthy and you're not. He wanted nothing to do with that.
Right, because a tax that affects 0.1% of the public is not a very good issue, especially if it's the 0.1%. It's the wealthiest in the country. The tax that affects 100% of people and is very unpopular, that's the one you want to fight on, and that's called the carbon tax. And so I don't think it's a very good strategy if you assume that your opponent is going to be completely politically stupid and give up the one that affects everyone for the one that affects Galen West and his buddies. So I think it was just too timid a measure if they wanted to bait him into that fight. And by the way, I expect Ford will spit that cheese out because it tastes rather bitter and unpleasant.
I do think I would just say that, it could be a political hot potato, like who's going to end up holding the elite riches. And when you talk about what interests voters the most, we know from public opinion polling that people are angry about the unfairness and the inequality and inflation. And they're targeting largely the rich, the CEOs, but also those who have not been paying their fair share. So if the Liberals successfully pass this hot potato back to the Conservatives and they keep on forcing them to answer this question, what would you do? Would you make our tax system fairer? Why is it that the people who are watching this show right now pay more tax on every dollar, frankly, than these people who are really in the top 0.1%? I mean, if we're paying...
But the messenger is a person who is in the top 1%. That's what convoluted it all in the House of Commons.
Yeah, it's true.
He's like, I mean, the guy in the opposition's been a politician his whole life. The other guy is the 0.1%. It's just,
they're both
I don't
unrelatable.
know what Canadian at home is going, you know who's got my back? These guys. Anyway, moving on. Speaking of that, Scott, I'll get your view on the other sort of political story, and that is the possibility of Dominic Leblanc. And this column in the Globe and Mail from Lawrence Martin, we played the exchange between Jordan Gowling, one of our producers, and Minister Leblanc. He answered part of it, but not all of it. What's your take on why that landed this week?
It's an anonymous cabinet minister says that he smoked cigars and drank cognac, and there's a secret cabal. It's all breathless. And I'm going to tell you something. I lived through leadership wars. I lived through leadership wars where people, took out carbines and rifles at one another. There's no leadership war here. Justin Trudeau and Dom LeBlanc have known each other since they were kids. Dom LeBlanc has his buddies back. No one's pushing on Trudeau. It's a remarkable thing about this government that they are in a situation where they've been stuck at 23, 24%. There is very little internal grumbling. There is no visible effort to push the PM at all. I don't really think you're going to get it. That's just the culture of this particular government. And, Dominic Leblanc, they'd be lucky, so lucky to have him if Trudeau does decide to leave, by all means. This guy, he's one of the very few cabinet ministers that can take a pitch off the plate and turn it around and put it over the fence. But, is he organizing? Is he trying to take the guy out? All that's just, it's a breathless remnant of a leadership era that's long gone. This ain't Clark Mulroney. This ain't Turner, Martin Chrétien. It's just not. And the attempts to torque it into such is, kind of wasted. I
may not have read it in the same way. I didn't really, Kory, read it as Dominic Leblanc's out for Justin Trudeau. Just that he's having conversations that he may not have had 6 months ago in the event that something would change. And certainly, I reached out to him, I reached out to his office. Nobody expressly denied it immediately, which leads me to believe, I'm not sure this is something that was done behind Trudeau's back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I read it as an audible that could happen. If there is no bump in the polls in the months following this budget and going through the summer, I think the pressure on Trudeau to resign will increase, including perhaps a decision that he makes himself. I don't think he's going to be shoved out the door, but he may decide in a Brian Mulroney 1992-93 way to choose to leave himself. And I view someone like a LeBlanc as a really powerful potential candidate to replace him if the Prime Minister chooses on his own accord to go. So I agree with Scott. This isn't a leadership fight of the Chrétien-Martin era. This is a potential replacement should the Prime Minister not see his numbers improve and decide that for the sake of the party to remove himself from the equation.
I agree completely with what Kory just said, and I think that the only thing I would add is that it does strike me as the ultimate save the furniture campaign. That if in fact they bring in if Trudeau decides to go, because it is going to be his decision, and LeBlanc steps in, it's because they think he's most able to actually save the biggest number of Liberal seats.
Well, they're probably right. Anyway, I'll leave it there. Thanks everyone. Thanks to our Sunday strategy session. Scott, Reid, Kory, Teneycke, and Kathleen Monk. When we come back today,